treating an individual as an individual, the person behind the performer, and the idea that you as their coach, you co-perform. You can't have a superstar player without a superstar coach. When you get better, your people get better.
Welcome to Voice Activated, the podcast dedicated to unlocking the power of employee feedback. I'm Sean Fitzpatrick, founder of TalentMap and your host. In each episode, we'll dive into real-world examples and best practices, as well as some lessons learned from employee surveys, pulse checks, focus groups, 360s, and more. If people are at the heart of your business, you're in the right place. Expect open conversations, practical advice, inspiring stories from companies that are getting it right, and some reflections from those who've hit a few bumps along the way. Tune in, listen up, and let's activate the voice of your employees. Well, welcome back to Voice Activated, the podcast where we explore how organizations can better hear, understand, and act on the employee voice. I'm your host, Sean Fitzpatrick, and today I'm joined with Dr. Christopher D. Lee, a seasoned HR professional who served as CHRO for 5 institutions, a Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, and now Managing Director of Storbeck Search. We'll unpack how decades of experience in leadership, search, and higher education has shaped his approach to building real listening cultures, one where feedback drives action and trust grows stronger. Christopher, welcome to Voice Activated.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be with you.
Over the years, as a CHRO at institutions like William & Mary and Virginia Community College System, how did you structure formal listening systems beyond surveys to keep, real-time pulse of employees? How did you go about thinking about that and working with those institutions?
That's a good question, Sean. I'm going to talk to it at 2 different levels. Obviously, having been an HR professional, it is hard to think about organizations without thinking about yourself as a leader, as well as the leaders you support, right? And so, as far as formal listening systems, I would describe, my work, obviously, on my book on performance conversations was built upon this idea of having rich, robust conversations with employees, that are really kind of a 21st century view of performance management. I'm one of those leaders or authors who early on, as early as 2006, made the argument that traditional performance management did not serve its intended ends, and that having robust and rich two-way dialogue with employees was close to the management holy grail. So we can kind of, unpack that a little bit later. You had asked me a question in writing or sent me a note earlier, and it said it's about a formative moment. And let me give you a formative moment. So I'm the chief HR officer at Bates College in Maine. Had a veteran admin assistant. Her name was Lucy, who was amazing. She was A+. And I noticed that the 3rd year we're having our performance kind of, management discussion, and she had a handkerchief with her, right? And she cried. Now, she cried at the first 2 as well, but it took me, I was slow to catch on, right? She came prepared to cry. And I was thinking, why? And we talked about it. And she said, because I know that I'm going to get negative feedback. It's going to be hurtful or whatever. Now, Lucy was A+. So I didn't have much constructive feedback to give her. But because of the trauma from her career, she came to those events prepared to cry. Now, the first 2 went really well. It was kind of like saying, hey, I'm new. You're amazing. I've learned a lot from you. Here's how we can tweak getting better together. So it wasn't negative, but she cried anyway because an ounce of negativity. So I would say to you, Sean, hey, let's have a performance discussion on Thursday, and you spend the whole week knowing and planning and expecting to get negative feedback. So that propelled me to create the performance conversations method, right? It's like, this didn't make any sense. An A+ employee who's traumatized by getting feedback. Something's wrong. And so that's how I went there. And then from there, from 2002, for 20 years, I, had a Tuesday afternoon conversation with someone on my team, one-on-one conversation, performance conversations method evolved from that, about how to create a new dynamic of listening and working with and bringing out the best in people.
Well, it's interesting because, when you talk about employee listening, a big part of it that we encourage it and how we think about it, it's really should be a two-way dialogue. All right, listening is just not about collecting data. How we talk, it's a starting point. You got to collect the data, get their input, but that's really the starting point. Now you can have a dialogue as a leader or manager. Once you have a starting point, and data is often useful to have that touch-off point. It certainly doesn't tell you everything. But it'd be interesting to hear because, I've heard about that. Like years ago, a number of years ago, maybe 5-10 years ago, you heard of different companies getting rid of their performance, feedback. Oh, it's not working and it's not effective. It's just really used for compensation. It wasn't really used for improvement, coaching, performance. It'd be interesting to hear how you've thought about that because it sounds like you've really, writing books on it really starts to make you crystallize your thinking, I'm sure, as to what works, what doesn't. So I'd like to hear what is it about performance commerce and how they're different from what you might consider traditional ones.
Oh yeah. So thank you. For me, that's a lot. So, let me kind of go into it. So I published Performance Conversations, an alternative to appraisal in 2006. Early scholar to make the argument traditional appraisals don't exist. At the time I was looking for a publisher, and the Society for HR Management, they were like, hey, Chris, we really like this, but we can't publish it because in our catalog, we have 24 books to say they do work. Right now, 2020, right? After the revolution that you talked about in 2015, 16, when Accenture, Deloitte, all of these other companies went away from it. They're like, hey, Chris, this is timely. So, for Performance Conversations 2.0, where I expanded upon the model, they were happy to publish. So that just tells you what happened in that ensuing 15 years about how the world, thought about it different. Now, I'm going to say here as a kind of clarification, the Performance Conversations method is not an appraisal. It is a performance improvement system, right? So that is what changed. So what changed was people realized that it was something you need to do more than just ask for feedback, and really spoke to what you just described, Sean, and the whole idea of it has to be two-way. It has to be at a certain amount of employee involvement and engagement because after all, it's their work. It's their output, it's their career, it's their income, right? All of those things are in play. And if they're not fully bought into the conversation and the results of it, then you're probably not going to make progress, right? And one of the words I use to describe once you get to that point is rapport, because here's where the biggest gap in the management literature exists. So you got all this management literature about a variety of things to include performance management, but what it misses is one key thing, and that is relationships. In order to have, a relationships that's productive, you have to get to rapport. And that rapport means that you and I have an open and honest and fruitful conversation to the degree to which I'm willing to tell the truth. Because it goes like this, Sean. If I'm sucking wind, if I'm not doing well, if I don't understand, I'm not likely to go to the person who's going to evaluate me, judge me, and give me a performance rating and say, I don't know, I'm confused, I need help. And you use that information to make economic decisions. So we have to have a relationship so rich that I'm willing to say, I don't know, I need help. And trust that you're not going to use that information against me, that you're going to use that information to help me. And that's what a performance conversation is designed to do.
In theory, that's really good, right? It's I think even if you talk to managers, they'd be, I'd love to get, a lot of them would love to get there. But if you think about how do they go about doing it? So sometimes we get feedback on, and we do a lot of employee feedback, a lot of surveys of different types. Often when we ask, does your manager clarify your goals? Does your manager coach or support your work and stuff? I have not talked to my manager in, weeks or months, you hear sometimes. And it's like, or I've never had a performance review, or sometimes they'll often use performance review or performance appraisal, whatever system or terminology they're using in that organization. So that's quite a leap to be able to have a rich, deep, trusting, psychologically safe discussion from an environment where I barely know my employees and are they married? Are they not married? Do they have kids? Are they not, what are they doing for free time? Like that's a deep investment that they have to put in. So how do managers go about that? Or how do you actually implement something like that?
Simply, Sean, I know it sounds, kind of pie in the sky, but that's what the performance management method was designed to do, exactly what you described. And you used the word I love to use, which, obviously comes from Crucial Conversations, which is psychological safety, right? Do I feel comfortable in telling the truth and, and that we have a fruitful and nurturing conversation? So it's simple as this. Stephen Covey, the second, right? He has that book, The Speed of Trust. Right? How do you build that? So I'm just going to, offer that the performance conversations method is simply this. It is a series of brief, structured conversations about things that matter the most. Simple as that. A planned series of conversation at some interval. And those intervals I would recommend are between 4 and 16 weeks, depending upon two factors. The first is the individual involved and the type of work that's being performed. Rookies need more attention than superstars or veterans. So more often, could be monthly. And superstars could be quarterly. Then the type of work you're doing. If you're doing work that is fairly consistent and stayed, predictable, then the period of time can be longer. But if it changes often, it needs to be shorter. So between every 4 weeks, could be monthly, could be every 6 weeks, could be every 16 weeks, you need to have a planned, pre-planned series of conversations. Now, by having more conversations, you get to the speed of trust idea. Trust can be summarized into a word that this gentleman who was a college president here in the States, a friend of mine called Ted Raspill, he was at Brightpoint Community College. He says, trust is about predictability. Can I predict how you react or what you might do, right? So by having a planned series of conversations, I know what's going to happen in those conversations. And those conversations, hopefully, are refueling stations. They're pep talks. They're opportunities for us to work on things together, two-way sort of conversation. So that's the series, and it's planned. The employee knows that I'm going to get my leader's undivided attention every other month, if you're by month. Right. And that's an opportunity for that meeting to be about me and what I need to be successful. All right. So brief, structured conversation. So 20 to 30 minutes. And it's going to be a structured conversation, not just any conversation about the weather or, whatever. There are ways of getting there. I have 3, key questions that I ask. There are different methods to use in the performance conversations method, or different techniques, that is. One of them is just simply asking questions. I have 3 questions that are kind of the magical 3, and then you get the magnificent 7. So 7 questions that get to kind of the core issue of, what's going on in the workplace.
Yeah. And well, share some of those. Share some of those questions.
Okay. So the easy ones, Sean, is to simply, what's going well and how can we replicate them? What's not going well and what can we do to, address those? And then, what else is going on in your work life that's important? And that's an opportunity to diagnose and troubleshoot potential problems or to seize opportunities. Now, the importance of that is you're asking people what's wrong. And if you develop a relationship, it's kind of hard to say, I'm 4 months behind on that on that report when you weren't 2 months behind the last time we talked. So it's an accountability opportunity, right? But it's not a punishment opportunity. Because, Sean, I'm going to ask you, are you late? What's the problem? And my goal is to say, how can I help? That's really what it's about. It's not about gotcha. It's about we're in this together. And that's about building that relationship. And so then on the things that matter most means that conversation is going to be different for everybody. Chris needs something different. And the type of work that Chris does is going to be different. So the point is that we're not going to talk about all these other esoteric ideas that might be on a performance appraisal. We're going to talk about the things that matter to this work right now for that you and I are trying to kind of co-perform, because that's what a supervisor and employee relationship, they co-perform, right? A great leaders create great employees. So it's a series of plain conversations. You know that we're going to get together every 12 weeks or every other month. And we know what's going to happen in those conversations. We're going to talk about these kinds of things which are important to our work together. And I'm going to be expected to do certain things. And if we do it well, you're actually going to come prepared. So not just the manager prepared, the employee is going to come prepared, because we know what the meeting's going to be about. And it's not punitive, right? So series of a brief structured conversation.
So it's not tied to compensation or like that's a separate discussion. You're really dislocating it from that, review around comp and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
It's designed to do one thing: improve performance. It's not designed to measure performance. It's not designed to rate performance. It's not designed to set compensation. It's designed to help you be at your very best. Now, here's the truth of it. We can use a performance conversations method as your performance management system, right? Or you could use it to supplement your system. Because if you look at the literature, which is what produced Performance Conversations 1.0, they all said the same thing. Oh, this didn't, preclude normal feedback or whatever. And so the point is that managers don't have a habit of doing that. And so we're giving them a management system that can be used as a performance management framework. And as a matter of fact, it improves it because you have those conversations needed. Now, 3 different techniques for the performance conversations method. The original basically says collect artifacts and of work, examples of work, reports, thank yous, emails, or whatever, bring them to the conversation. We might talk about them. That's kind of 1.0. 2.0 added 2 additional techniques. One is the questions that we offer, right? So 3 questions or 7 questions that kind of get at things. And then the third is kind of a checklist method, which basically says, here are the most important things that happen in our work environment. And we're going to make sure we cover these over the year we have conversations. And in some meetings, we talk about all of them. And then some meetings, we only talk about some of them. But the point is you have a planned series of conversations over the year.
How have you seen organizations provide the script, the forms, the info, because managers come from all stripes and backgrounds. Some of them will be very organized and have a binder or digital notebook or whatever. Some won't, and they'll just wing it. So I just wondering how and for employees, do they, do you have a constant sort of place where you can share or collaborate, or what have you seen? Is it as simple as a Google Doc that you put up and share, or is there things that get a little more formal around some of these things?
Yeah, it's both, and and you're right. Performance Conversations 1.0 said, essentially, use what you use now. And if you don't use something, you should be as a manager, which means you have a journal. That's what I have within my arm's reach, Sean, for my entire career. There goes my journal, right? And I can go back and, talk about what we talked about last time. Some people use a calendar system where they have a calendar, they keep notes on a calendar and stuff like that. Some use a spreadsheet, right? Some have a kind of a digital folder, right? The point is, as a manager, you should have some routine or some system keeping track of important things, such as conversations with employees and the things that you need to follow up on. And so 1.0 said, use a system, period. And here 5 or 6 different examples. 2.0 says, hey, there's a pattern of what needs to be covered. Here's 7 questions to get at the typical pattern that most organizations, will have. And then the checklist method is the same thing. You're going to design a checklist that speaks to your particular work and your particular work environment. If you're in a sales environment, man, we're going to talk about leads, sales, and pay. If you're in a manufacturing environment, we're going to talk about productivity, safety, efficiencies, machine maintenance, or whatever the case may be. The point is that there are patterns, and we create a system, because that's all management is, right? In processes, we're going to create a system to kind of routinize, if you will, how to do these things in an excellent manner. And that's what the Performance Conversations method is designed to do.
So you've talked about the magnificent 7, the key 7. What are those? You've touched on the 3 big broad ones, and tell us a little bit about the 7.
All right, I'm going to have to grab my book because that's why I wrote them down. I can't remember everything.
Or at least 5 out of the 7.
Yeah. So the three obviously that we've talked about, goals. What about action plans and goals? One.
Yeah. Like for work, for the next quarter or next quarter of the year or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Things that are important. Relationships. How are your work, relationships? And then there's a 6th one in there, which I can never remember. I'll figure it out. But the 7th one is the most important one, which I think, which is, what can I do to help you, Sean, do your very best work? That's the last question. It's not to help you do your job. It's not to help you work, to do your very best work. That is the ultimate accountability question. Because as Sean says to Chris, what can I do to help you do your very best work? Then Chris has no excuse to not produce excellent work because he got all the support and guidance he needs. Now, here's the tricky part. It's also the ultimate accountability for the leader. Because if Chris says to Sean, I need a better computer, I need clearer instructions, I need more realistic deadlines, or whatever the issue is, Chris has said, the reason I'm underperforming is because I don't have everything I need. And I'm telling you specifically what I need. Right? And so it's really the ultimate accountability question for both parties. Right? So that's the whole idea of asking a series of questions that are designed to move folks, forward.
What about training for managers? Like, how do you? It sounds simple, but you gotta help manage, because sometimes you'll ask questions and employees will go in all different directions. They might get into their personal life, might get into all kinds of things. That what's the level of training needed for frontline leaders? I'm not talking about executives that have maybe gone through various programs and initiatives over their years, but someone who's fairly new into the management role or had a management role but never had to really do these types of relationship building, trust building work with their direct reports.
Yeah, very, very good and very prescient thinking there, Sean. The 7th question is, how are you? And I asked that last, right? And, some people will disagree with that perspective, but the book offers lots of reasons why that's last. Because you're right. Sometimes if you get chatty employees who like to get off subject, sometimes you can start with, how are you? And you find out about the grandkids, the vacation, and they're prepping you by throwing in little things along the way that are excuses for not performing. So I found that to check in becomes, on the person, because you need to check in on the person as well, because the performance is done by a person, not, in addition to a professional. So the book talks a lot about that. The Performance Conversation method manages both the person and the professional, because you cannot manage me if you don't know me. And that's what you were mentioning earlier about getting to know your employee, right? Because giving this feedback to Chris and exact same feedback to Sean gets you different results because of the people involved and the relationship. And that's the big gap in management literature. It speaks to the performer, but it ignores the person. And that's what relationship and rapport is important. So how do you get there? And that's why those questions were created, to create the structure so that those things are done in a predictable and more efficient and effective manner. It helps to manage the relationship. It helps to manage the workplace. It gives you a certain rhythm and timing and a focus on the structured part of the conversation. And then you kind of get to how's a person performing, how a person doing, what do they need, are there things that we're thinking about. So it kind of again routinizes things that are in that milieu that you just talked about, right? It's not catch as catch can. It's a structured conversation. Now, the Performance Conversations 2.0 has a long subtitle, and I have to read it too because the joke is that you write the book, the editor determines what the title is because you can write it, but we have to sell it. So it's how to use questions to coach employees, improve productivity, and boost confidence, right? So asking questions is an art, and the book talks about that and how to do that better. And so here's an example. So the Performance Conversations method is a series of brief structured conversations about things that matter most. Every manager uses a series of brief structured conversations with questions, and we call that not a series, but a one-off, and that's an interview. Same idea. It's a series of structured questions in a one-time scenario to find out if a person has the goods, the capabilities, the experience. So we use the same method flipped for how well you've done at the job we've hired you to do.
Interesting. If I think about this, if I pick a 1,000-person or 5,000-person organization, and they got hundreds of managers. How do you introduce something like this? How do you ensure the different departments are somewhat consistent? Because you could have one department, that's really embraces this and does it because maybe the VP or executive VP or whatever is really deep into this. Another one just doesn't think it's so good, doesn't do it, so it doesn't happen. How do you go about thinking about just rolling this out and getting it used systematically across the whole organization?
Yeah, I've done it for a lot of organizations, and there's an art to it, and that art is related to the mission and purpose of that enterprise. So how we quote sell it to managers is, this is not a performance management system. This is a performance improvement system. It's designed to help you as a manager achieve your objectives. So in some organizations, one organization, I think we called it Conversations About the Future, right? Because they were a growth-oriented organization.
Yeah, and so it's always future focused, all the conversations are generally,
Another organization, we call them retention conversations because they were in an environment with a lot of non-exempt employees, and, people might leave, for another organization for another 50 cents an hour, whatever. And it was about understanding and knowing your employees, them coming to you with a possible counter, say, hey, I need to make more money. I'm about to have a kid or whatever. And the point is that how would you know they're thinking about it unless you had an opportunity for their employee to come raise their hand and say, I want promotional opportunity. I need to make more money, or I'm having, problems with my coworker. The performance conversation creates that opportunity. So the point is that as I've worked with different organizations, we've crafted the methodology around the primary needs of the organization. What are the three big issues around managing people? And then we build a system around that. So works easy in a professional knowledge kind of profession, right? Accountants, lawyers, IT people, HR people, whatever the case may be. But then, I've also worked with organizations here with a lot of non-exempt employees. And one, as an example, they had employees in a kind of a factory, bakery sort of environment. And so you had individuals on basically lines producing goods, that sort of thing. And the method we used for them was to have the leader have a 5-minute conversation with every employee, essentially over about a 2-week period of time. So at 4:30 every day, the manager would go from person to person and check in and say, here's 2-3 questions you're going to be asked. How you doing? Do you need anything? Whatever. The point is, we structured it around their work. And only 5 minutes off the line, right? But over a 2-week period of time, he touched everybody between 4:30 and 5, right? Retention, because we caught the problems, we caught the issues, the friction that made people want to leave, right? So we design it to the environment that's appropriate.
We talked about managers and preparing them. How do you help prepare employees for these conversations? Like what do they get? Or, because all of a sudden, if my manager starts coming asking me about all kinds of things that they never asked me about before, I'd be, what is going on here? Maybe should I be looking for another job? They're asking me all kinds of things. And, how do you prepare employees?
I know you didn't have a chance to read the book, yet, Sean, but you keep throwing me lobs, which is really cool, right? So questions to ask my manager, right? Interesting, questions to ask myself before I talk to my manager, right? So you're absolutely right, because we're preparing the dyad for a two-way conversation. It's not a one-way conversation. A conversation can't be one way. I'm not giving you a rating, and I'm not telling you what you've done good or telling what you've done bad. It's a conversation. And so the whole method is designed to prepare both the employee and the manager for the conversation, right? And, and really good employees, I did it for 20 years. My pattern was 1:30 Tuesday afternoons. I had a performance conversation with one of my direct reports, right? So I had 6 direct reports every 6 weeks. If I had 8, it was every 8 weeks or whatever the case may be. And I had that conversation. The star employees, man, they ran the meeting. They knew that I was going to get Chris's time. And that purpose of that meeting was to help me perform better, to help me grow, to help me stay on task or whatever. And they would come and say, here's what I want to talk about today. Now, I structured those conversations. There's different ways you can structure those with different questions or different prompts. But the point was, the good employees reveled in the opportunity to get their leaders' undivided attention.
Sure. Yeah. Because they're thinking, okay, here he's or she or they're a tool that I could use to help perform better. How do I best leverage this upcoming opportunity? I'm meeting with them to get more information, training, tools, resources to achieve what I want to achieve as an employee. Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely. Sharing the responsibility for outcomes. The traditional method is the supervisor's responsible. We train employees to say, hey, this is your job. This is your career. This is your livelihood, right? This is your growth opportunity. This person, their role is to help you do that. And so when we train the leaders, right, and then the managers and the supervisors and the employees, we train them slightly different, but with all the same idea. And so if we do it well, then the employees, they hold their leaders accountable. Because what they say is, hey, Chris, we haven't had a performance conversation. When are we going to have our performance conversation? Right? Because they know it helps me. Right? And there's a protocol in the book about what to do, because managers are busy, and about should you postpone, or cancel, meetings. Right? There's a protocol, around doing that. You want to give employees the latitude to do that, but not all of them, because sometimes they're canceling because they don't want to be held accountable. Sometimes they're canceling because they're working, right? And so the point is, there's like 6 or 7 scenarios. It's like, in this situation, you reschedule. This situation, you postpone. This one, you cancel, right? Depending on the employee and the work involved. But the whole point is that 20 years perfecting the methodologies, right? How to engage employees in a way to bring out the very best in them.
What percentage of organizations do you think out there now approach it like this performance conversations? Whether it's this method, your method that you've walked through, which is great because it's simple, it's easy to picture, it's easy to understand, but something like that, would that be 50%, more than 50%, less than what's your, and maybe you've got some research or data on this. I don't know.
Well, I don't have any research on this, and there's no data to be conclusive. I've seen some, but, it's not kind of universal. I would say it this way. The vast majority of organizations still use the traditional method because the managers haven't got into the 21st century yet, but it's changing every year. But I will tell you that approximately 1/3 are doing some elements of the performance conversations method, right? Meaning that they are abandoning ratings, that sort of thing, moving more on a conversational basis or requiring some sort of more frequent thing versus the annual thing. So, good organizations that are doing it well are obviously places like Google's, they call them one-on-ones. Right? GE calls them pulses. Kelly Services calls them, I can't, I just lost the thought here. But the point is, Adobe, as a matter of fact, Adobe, I shared the platform with them as early as 2010 or 11. We kind of co-presented at a conference at the World Bank on the methodologies that are different. So the point is, enlightened organizations are doing some of the elements. My contributions to the literature is that I've created a formal structure and way of doing really just a great management technique. Many organizations are moving in that direction of how to create feedback systems that are designed to be more conversational and interactive.
Okay. Yeah, and it's something that I think managers are starting to embrace, but you don't see it everywhere yet. If you think about, I just got one or two more questions. One is just, if I tie it back to employee listening mechanisms and tools like surveys and pulses and because a lot of organizations do that. In fact, often performance management or performance feedback is sort of one of the topics on our survey, standard survey that we use, often comes up as a key issue that are cited by or brought up by employees. How can you integrate, synchronize, tie together sort of that broader, anonymous or confidential employee surveys that organizations do to this type of one-on-one work? Where's the integration or alignment where you might see that could be useful for both of them? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think your surveys become your report card on if managers are basically managing, right? Performance conversations gives them a way of managing. So the surveys ask you, has someone given you feedback? Has someone given you recognition? Has someone given you instructions about what to do and what to expect? Who's that someone? Right? You get some from your peers, right? But by and large, it's the relationship with the leader. And so when the surveys tell you it ain't happening, then the managers are not doing it, or they're doing it the wrong way or in a pro forma way. They're having meetings, but they're not listening, right? They're talking and telling. They're not really listening, because what Sean is saying is, hey, I just had a newborn and I'm going to give you 100%. I'm used to giving you 110, but you hear him, there's something else is going on, right? You know what I'm saying? So just lay off for 6 months or a year until he gets used to this new thing in his life or whatever. The point is, if you're not listening and you don't know the person, then you make silly little mistakes. So for example, I worked in higher education, for most of my career. And there was a pattern. I knew members of my staff, in HR, largely women. I could tell you exactly when they were going to take leave every year. Their primary responsibility for them in their life was to be parents. And I get the local school system schedule, and I knew when spring break was, whatever. And then, of course, if you're a smart manager, you know when their anniversary is. And it's important because you see a pattern over time, and you can just put it on the calendar. And so I used to have this thing where I'd say, there's no work hours. I don't approve vacation. You decide. Because you know what your work is and what the requirements of the enterprise are. You have to be there on game day. Substitute, whatever. But I knew in game days we had presidential searches or we had this thing going on or whatever. And I look at it and go, oh man, she's going to be out. And I'm going to give her an excuse for that. She didn't have that because I knew that this was something that was important to that person. And then you have to explain it to the rest of the staff, right? You can ask, I decided. You see what I'm saying? The point is, you knew your employees. How are you going to know your employees? You're going to have a series of brief structured conversations with them over a period of time, right? So that's what it's not magic. It's not rocket science. It's a management system.
Needs a system and discipline. Yeah. A last sort of question of this, and then I want to ask you just one broad thing that you'd like to leave with listeners. But what about the executive team? Is this something that you start at the top and then roll it out, or do you start in a department? And is working with like the president, CEO, and the direct reports, do they view this differently than, let's say, shift supervisor, frontline manager, that type of thing?
Well, I found that the star managers the star executives, they do it already. They don't necessarily do it in this manner or in a structured way, but that's why they're successful, because they figured out how to get this out of people. So they have some methodologies that are similar. A. B, intuitively, once you explain it to them, most, kind of get it. Right. Which is good. And then the other, some people are relieved because they're like, oh, you've given me a tool to use and I could follow that or whatever. Right. And then you got the introverts, man, they're relieved. Right. It's like, oh, man, I know exactly how to have that conversation. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just have to follow these questions here or whatever. So, the reactions are different, but we sell it to executives by the basic thing that every executive wants: performance improvement. That's what it's about. This is not about checking a box. This is not about, doing that. This is designed to improve performance. It's a performance improvement system. That's all it is. So we found executives, and then we train them differently, of course, right? We talk about the culture that they set. We talk about the system. We talk about supervisors and how those are integrated. But the point is that we found executives to be early adopters, and we tell, hey, have the conversation. Or they will also say, well, I wish I'd had that when I was coming up.
Yeah, and it's important to get them on board because they often act as a role model for the rest of the, if they're showing it, doing it, then the next level down does it well, and it just cascades nicely often in an organization. So seeing that leadership team buying in, either with the system that they've used that they built themselves because they know it works, or adopting one or whatever.
And one additional thing for executives is that at a certain management level, you don't really have to manage the system because you have senior enough people to do it for you. So, you basically say to executives, if you don't want to write the notes and stuff like that, just have your directors do it. Right? Because they can, because they're doing it for their people and they're doing it for you because you're more busy than they are. That's kind of how we design bureaucracies, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
I think the readers would be very interested in this book and the work that you've done here. How do they get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out to learn more? And, where do they get? Do they go to Amazon, or they go to the SHRM, or where do they get copies of this, or where they can learn more about it?
Yeah, it's widely available. SHRM is the publisher. So, obviously they're the biggest HR organization in the planet. So it's easy to get it, Amazon, et cetera. Performanceconversations.com is the website. And I'm simply Chris at performanceconversations.com. So easy to get to or whatever. So happy to help folks in any way. I'm a little bit of an HR evangelist, right? In that, I think, we do better by our people and have a more productive work environment. With the key, if we treat employees like people, right? Developing rapport. We forget the person inside of the performer. And I think you unlock human potential by focusing on that coaching approach, which is to get to know that performer and their quirks and their needs and their, kind of maladies or just the thing that makes them tick. And the only way you do that is to get to know them through a series of brief structured conversations, right? Over time, you get better and better at tweaking how you work and relate to the other person. The 20th century model is over. That I'm firm but fair. I treat everybody the same. That's for the birds. The 21st century model, you tell the whole team, go get them, and the same thing. 21st century model is like a tennis coach or the golf coach. No, I'm coaching Chris or Paul or Susan. And Susan is different than Chris. And I got to tweak myself to give her what she needs. And you get there by learning that person, interacting with them, and hearing what they're saying, right? What they need.
I like that analogy of a golf coach. Everyone has a unique swing, something slightly different, and they all can hit the ball and, get them into the hole and maybe get a par or bogey, but everyone does it in a different way. There's no standard out there. So that's a really good analogy. If there's one last thing, if there's anything you'd like to leave our listeners with, one last sort of idea or suggestion, just what would that be?
Yeah. I think I should just share that with you, is treating an individual as an individual, the person behind the performer, and the idea that you as their coach, you co-perform, right? You can't have a superstar player without a superstar coach. It's a dyad. When you get better, your people get better, right? So focus on the idea of co-performance, and I think that helps to unleash the collective's potential.
Well, Christopher, that's an excellent way to wrap up this podcast. And thank you very much. And I think there's some great nuggets in here. Really like that idea of working together to achieve the goals, not the manager, driving performance through metrics and imputative type of approach, but trying to work together to achieve what makes sense. And some of your approaches are so simple for managers. I think it's an easy tool to adopt or a process to adopt, whatever. And I'm glad you have some resources where some of our listeners can learn more. And all of this will be in the show notes. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to improving performance one step at a time. Thanks,
all right.
Christopher.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Voice Activated. If you've heard something that got you thinking, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Talk about it, put it into play. That's how better workplaces get built. When you're ready to move from insight into action, head over to TalentMap.com. You'll find tools, resources, and strategies to help you lead better with clarity, empathy, and impact. And make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any more real conversations with leaders who know that some of the best ideas for change don't come from the top, but from those employees closest to the work.